Before Rome was an empire, it almost didn't survive its first real test. This wasn't a border dispute or a minor skirmish. This was the ancient world's version of World War II, a struggle that lasted 23 years, consumed entire generations, and redrew the map of the human story. In the 3rd century BC, the world was divided. Rome, the relentless machine that had just finished crushing every rival in Italy. Carthage, the supreme maritime superpower whose wealth flowed from every corner of the sea. For centuries, they were distant partners. They signed treaties, they respected borders. Rome ruled the land, Carthage ruled the waves. It was an uneasy balance until the moment it shattered. This is the story of how a land power did the impossible. They challenged the masters of the sea, and in doing so, they reinvented the art of war. By 264 BC, Rome had achieved the extraordinary. Through decades of brutal warfare and stubborn endurance, they had unified the Italian peninsula. No foreign army stood on their soil. Carthage, meanwhile, was at the zenith of its prestige. Their fleets dominated the western Mediterranean, stretching from Spain to North Africa and into the strategic gems of Sardinia and Corsica. But between these two giants lay Sicily. Sicily was the crossroads of the world. It was the bridge between east and west, the key to the grain trade, and the ultimate naval base. As long as Rome stayed in the mountains of Italy and Carthage stayed on the water, they could coexist. But once Rome reached the southern tip of the peninsula, they weren't just neighbors anymore. They were competitors for the same piece of dirt. To understand why Rome believed they could actually win this, we have to look at the ghosts of the men who fought here first. Before Rome and Carthage locked horns, 2 Greek titans had already tried to break the status quo. They provided the blueprint for everything that was to come. The first was a man who rose from nothing. Agathocles of Syracuse. He was the son of a humble potter, but he didn't stay at the wheel for long. Agathocles was a man of blood and iron. After being exiled by the ruling oligarchs of Syracuse, he didn't just go away. He became a mercenary leader in Italy, as he hired a group of mercenaries that called themselves the Mamertines, the Sons of Mars. Remember that name. It will haunt the Mediterranean for decades. Eventually, Agathocles carved his way back into Syracuse, massacred the ruling class, and declared himself tyrant. But he wanted more than just one city. He wanted all of Sicily. This put him on a direct collision course with the western masters of the island, Carthage. In 311, the Carthaginians struck back, defeating Agathocles at Gela and pinning him behind the walls of Syracuse. Most men would have surrendered. Agathocles did the unthinkable. With the enemy at his gates, he slipped out of the harbor with 60 ships and sailed straight for North Africa. When he landed, he gave his men a terrifying choice. He burned his own ships. There was no retreat. There was only victory or death. He marched on the gates of Carthage itself, causing such a panic that the Carthaginians, in a desperate bid for divine favor, reportedly sacrificed 500 children from their noble families. Agathocles eventually failed to take the city, but he left behind a terrifying truth that Rome would never forget. The city of Carthage itself was the Achilles' heel. If you could cross the sea, you could strike at their heart. Then came the second teacher, Pyrrhus of Epirus. Pyrrhus was a cousin of Alexander the Great, and arguably the finest tactical mind of his age. When the city of Tarentum felt the squeeze of Roman expansion, they called him for help. In 280, Pyrrhus landed in Italy with a nightmare for the Romans: 20,000 professional phalangites and war elephants, the tanks of the ancient world. Pyrrhus handed Rome defeat after defeat at Heraclea and Asculum. But here, the world saw the Roman machine in action. No matter how many men Pyrrhus killed, The Romans simply raised more. Rome didn't negotiate. They didn't blink. Pyrrhus famously remarked after his victories, "If we are victorious in one more battle with the Romans, we shall be utterly ruined." This was the birth of the Pyrrhic victory. Exhausted by Italy, Pyrrhus moved to Sicily to fight the Carthaginians, even being proclaimed king of Syracuse. But he found the island to be a political swamp. As he finally abandoned the West in 275, he headed back to his homeland in Greece. From these two men, Rome didn't just learn history, they learned strategy. From Agathocles, they learned that Carthage can be hit at home. From Pyrrhus, they learned that Rome can lose every battle and still win the war through sheer, stubborn endurance. By 264, the tutorial was over. It was time for the students to become the masters. The spark wasn't a grand decree. It was a group of mercenaries called the Mamertines. They had seized the city of Messana through treachery and murder. When they were threatened by Syracuse, they played a dangerous game. They appealed to Carthage for help, and then they appealed to Rome. Carthage moved first, occupying the city. Now, Carthaginian soldiers stood within sight of the Italian coast. The Roman Senate was torn. Supporting these mercenaries was morally wrong. Rome had just executed its own soldiers for the same crime. But the fear of a Carthaginian cork on the Strait of Messana was too much to ignore. Rome chose survival over consistency. In 264, for the first time in history, a Roman army crossed the sea. The wrestling ground was set. The early fighting was a wake-up call. Rome was dominant on land. At the siege of Agrigentum, they crushed the Carthaginian forces and sold 25,000 people into slavery. It was a victory, but it was hollow, because as long as Carthage ruled the waves, they could resupply their coastal fortresses forever. They could raid the Italian coast at will. Rome was a boxer trying to fight a ghost. They realized a terrifying reality. To win this war, they had to go where Romans feared to tread. They had to build a navy. Rome had no navy. They were farmers and soldiers, not sailors. Legend says they found a wrecked Carthaginian quinquereme on a beach and used it as a blueprint. In an unbelievable feat of willpower, they built an entire fleet in just 60 days. But there was a problem. The Romans couldn't sail. Their ships were slow, heavy, and clumsy. In their first outing, a Roman squadron was captured without even firing a shot. Instead of retreating, Rome did what they do best. They hacked the game. They invented the corvus, a massive boarding bridge with a heavy spike at the end. They didn't need to outsail the Carthaginians, they just needed to get close. When the corvus slammed down, it locked the ships together, turning a sea battle into a land battle. At the Battle of Mylae, the world changed. The invincible Carthaginian fleet was boarded by Roman infantry. 50 ships were lost. For the first time, Rome was a naval power. By the end of this first phase, the stakes had evolved. This wasn't about one city anymore. Rome had crossed the sea. Rome had built a fleet. Rome had proven they could adapt to any challenge. But Carthage was not done. They were a civilization built on trade and resilience, and they would spend the next 2 decades trying to drown the Roman upstarts. But in trying to drown Rome, Carthage only succeeded in tempering it. Before this conflict, the Mediterranean had been defined by the shadow of Alexander the Great. Alexander had swept across the east like a god, creating an empire that touched the Indus River before his sudden death. But Alexander's empire was a flash of lightning. Brilliant, but brief. Rome was different. By surviving the First Punic War, Rome was doing something Alexander never had to. They were learning how to build a superpower from the ground up, ship by ship and legion by legion. This war was the transition point. It was the moment the age of Alexander ended and the age of Rome began. The greatness we associate with Rome, the marble columns, the paved roads stretching from Britain to Egypt, the sheer crushing weight of Pax Romana, all of it has its roots right here, in the shipyards of 260 BC. By refusing to lose, Rome had accidentally stumbled onto the secret of world domination. They had transformed from a local Italian power into a predator that wouldn't stop until the entire Mediterranean was a Roman lake. Years earlier, Pyrrhus of Epirus had looked at Sicily and remarked, "What a wrestling ground we are leaving for the Carthaginians and Romans." He was right, and the wrestling match had only just begun.